It began, as most tragedies in small towns do, with a whisper that no one wanted to believe. In the quiet suburb of Maple Hollow, Virginia, residents prided themselves on manicured lawns, tidy cul-de-sacs, and an illusion of safety so airtight it felt almost scripted. The kind of place where people left car doors unlocked, where gossip was more dangerous than crime itself. But one March morning in 2019, when police cruisers gathered outside a slate-gray colonial on Pinehurst Drive, that illusion cracked, and the name Dr. Lydia Rowe began its slow transformation from respected therapist to suspected manipulator. Dr. Rowe had built her reputation carefully over 15 years of practice. Her clinic, Rowe Wellness and Trauma Center, sat in a converted farmhouse at the edge of town, a white clapboard refuge with a wraparound porch, wind chimes that sang in the breeze, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Find your calm." Inside, lavender diffusers hissed in steady rhythm. A curated playlist of piano music hummed, and Lydia's voice, soft, deliberate, disarmingly maternal, guided patients through the minefields of grief, addiction, and anxiety. To her clients, she was both anchor and oracle. She remembered birthdays, children's names, even the flavor of tea someone mentioned once in passing. She had the rare gift of making people feel seen, too seen, as one detective would later say. Her waiting list stretched for months. Among those waiting were Evan Riley, a 32-year-old carpenter battling depression after a bitter divorce, Marissa Cole, a former preschool teacher coping with infertility, and Jenna Price, a quiet woman in her mid-20s who rarely spoke about her sessions at all. All three would later be arrested for crimes that seemed impossible for people of their gentle demeanors. And all three, as investigators would discover, shared one thing besides Dr. Rowe's therapy room. They claimed they'd done what they did for her. On March 17th, 2019, Maple Hollow police responded to an early morning break-in at the home of Arthur Lang, a retired real estate developer and local philanthropist. Lang, 71, was found tied to a chair at his study, shaken but alive. His safe had been emptied of nearly $60,000 in cash and a small box of jewelry belonging to his late wife. Within 48 hours, the perpetrators were identified: Evan Riley and Jenna Price. Both had no prior criminal record. Evan was cooperative, even apologetic, confessing almost immediately. But when detectives asked why he'd done it, his answer made little sense. Dr. Rowe said it was the only way I'd ever get free, he told Detective Laura Baines, his voice trembling. She said Arthur had taken something from me. She said it was time I took it back. At first, the statement was dismissed as an attempt to deflect guilt. Maybe he was delusional, under stress, misinterpreting advice. But then Jenna Price, arrested the next day, said nearly the same thing. She said we were doing something good, fixing the balance. That she was Lydia Rowe. Detective Baines was skeptical. A therapist manipulating patients into crimes sounded like the plot of a late-night cable drama, not the kind of case Maple Hollow handled. Still, something about the calm conviction in Jenna's voice unsettled her. So Baines visited the Rowe Wellness Center herself. She found Lydia exactly as everyone described. Poised, graceful, the kind of person whose presence quieted a room. Lydia listened to detectives' questions without interrupting, her expression registering only polite confusion. "You're saying my patients committed a crime and are now blaming me?" Lydia said, hands folded loosely in her lap. "Detective, I don't know what's going on in their heads, but therapy is about empowerment. I teach them to reclaim control over their lives. If they took that too far, that breaks my heart." It was an elegant answer, too elegant, Baines thought. After the interview, she stepped outside into the crisp March air and watched patients come and go from the parking lot. One after another, they emerged with glassy eyes and half smiles, as if stepping out of a spell. She couldn't explain why it bothered her so much, but she noted it anyway. When the police searched Evan Riley's apartment, they found something stranger than the stolen cash or jewelry: a stack of cassette tapes, each labeled in Lydia's looping handwriting. Session 1, Session 2, Session 3? The tapes had been gift from Dr. Rowe. Guided meditations meant for private listening between appointments. The first few were harmless, breathing exercises, affirmations. But by Session 8, the tone shifted. People take from you because they sense your weakness. Lydia's voice murmured through static. But weakness is a choice, Evan. If the world owes you, you must collect your due. It wasn't a direct order to rob anyone, but the intent felt poisonous. Detectives listened to more tapes. In Jenna's collection, she told her patient that cleansing acts require courage, and that guilt is a cage built by others. Prosecutors later called it a blueprint for moral collapse. Lydia's rise had been unremarkable at first. Born Lydia Grace Hollander in 1978, she grew up in a strict household in Richmond. Her father, a pastor, believed mental illness was a failure of faith. At 22, she changed her name and left for graduate school in Chicago, earning a doctorate in counseling psychology. Former classmates describe her as hypnotically persuasive, someone who could win any debate simply by lowering her voice. When she moved to Maple Hollow in 2005, her credentials appear flawless, until Detective Baines dug deeper. Lydia's license had once been suspended in Illinois for boundary violations, a polite term for emotional entanglement with a patient. She quietly relocated to Virginia soon after. While investigators built their case, the town tried to move on, but peace didn't last. On May 9th, a bank in nearby Chesterfield was robbed by Marissa Cole, the same former teacher under Lydia's care for anxiety. Surveillance showed her trembling but oddly serene, passing the teller a note that read simply, "No one will get hurt. I just need what's mine." She made no attempt to flee far. When police found her parked behind a church 15 minutes later, she was sitting calmly in her car, eyes closed, Lydia's voice playing from her phone speaker. "You're doing what must be done," the recording said. "Sometimes redemption looks like rebellion." That was when the story broke nationally. The therapist who made her patients criminals. One headline read, "The town turned on Lydia overnight. Parents pulled their children from therapy." The clinic sign was spray-painted with the word witch. Still, she denied everything, calling it mass hysteria fueled by guilt and misunderstanding. Detective Baines, now obsessed, requested a second interview. This time, she brought a recorder. "Baines, you told Evan that people take from him because he's weak." "Rowe, in context, that a metaphor. I help people see patterns." "Baines, you also told Jenna that cleansing acts require courage." "Rowe, courage to forgive themselves, detective." "Baines, then why are they committing felonies right after those sessions?" "Rowe, after a pause, because healing is messy. People break before they mend." It was a kind of answer that made headlines later, but at the time it just frustrated Baines. She had circumstantial evidence. Tapes, timelines, motive, but no direct proof Lydia instructed anyone to commit crimes. What cracked the case open wasn't police work. It was pain. In June 2019, several of Lydia's former patients formed a private online support group called Rowe Recoverers. What started as mutual therapy soon turned into a collective investigation. They compared notes, dates, and, most chillingly, phrases Lydia repeated across sessions. "Do what must be done." "You deserve reclamation." "Forgiveness comes after the act." Different patients. Same wording. Same tone. When the group forwarded their findings to police, Baines finally saw the pattern. Lydia had been using individualized triggers. To Evan, whose ex-wife had taken most of his savings, she spoke of financial reclamation. To Marissa, who'd lost her sense of motherhood, she whispered about taking back creation. To Jenna, who'd been abused by a mentor, she said power balances must be corrected. Each crime mirrored a trauma. A search warrant for Lydia's office yielded hundreds of patient files meticulously arranged. But hidden behind a false panel in her filing cabinet were microcassettes, each labeled with initials rather than names. When forensics restored them, the truth surfaced. In one, Lydia could be heard speaking softly. "You'll feel frightened, Jenna. That's natural. But remember, justice isn't always legal." In another, "Evan, I'll never tell you what to do. I'll just remind you what was done to you." It wasn't direct coercion. It was suggestion sharpened into a blade. She didn't tell them to act. She built the emotional architecture, so they'd want to. A therapist turning therapy itself into manipulation. By summer, Maple Hollow had split in two. Some believed Lydia was a monster who preyed on fragile minds. Others claimed she was a scapegoat, that these were broken people seeking someone to blame. Her supporters formed Facebook groups insisting she'd been targeted by the system for being unconventional. Lydia herself gave a rare interview to a local reporter, sitting serene in her garden. When asked about the accusations, she smiled faintly. "The mind is a dangerous place. I just held the mirror. If they didn't like the reflection, that isn't my crime." Before authorities could arrest her, Lydia Rowe disappeared. On August 14th, 2019, police arrived with a warrant. The clinic was empty. Her car sat in the gravel lot, keys in the ignition. Inside the office, the scent of lavender still lingered, but every file, every tape, every computer drive was gone. All that remained was a single handwritten note on her desk. "The work continues." The FBI joined the search. Bank records showed Lydia had withdrawn nearly $200,000 in cash weeks earlier. Surveillance captured her at a gas station in North Carolina, buying a bus ticket under an alias L. Hollis. Then the trail went cold. Meanwhile, her former patients faced trial. Evan Riley accepted a plea deal for armed robbery. Marissa Cole was sentenced to 4 years, later transferred to a psychiatric facility after a suicide attempt. Jenna Price refused to speak to anyone, but their testimonies in court echoed the same chilling loyalty. "She saved me," Marissa said through tears. "She just asked me to prove it." Nearly a year later, in July 2020, a woman matching Lydia's description was reported living under name Dr. Leah Ronan in Portland, Oregon, working quietly as a life coach. When local police raided her apartment, they found evidence she'd begun seeing clients again. On a whiteboard in her kitchen were words circled in red marker: belief, action, release. Among her notes were lists of new client names, most drawn from online trauma forums. But Leah, was gone again, vanishing minutes before officers arrived. Neighbors said they'd seen her carrying boxes to a waiting SUV the night before. On the counter, she left a single teacup, still warm. The deeper investigators analyzed her files, the clearer her method became. Lydia wasn't after money or power. She wanted obedience born of gratitude. She targeted patients in crisis, those who felt wronged, powerless, unseen, and replaced their moral compass with her own fractured sense of justice. Experts later dubbed it transference exploitation, weaponizing therapy's trust to shape behavior. Lydia had rewritten the sacred therapist-patient dynamic into a cult of one. Psychologists who reviewed her recording said she practiced conversational hypnosis, using pacing, repetition, and subliminal affirmations that blurred moral boundaries. She didn't tell them to steal or harm, one analyst explained. She told them they were already justified if they did. In October 2020, Detective Baines received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed on a manual typewriter. Detective Baines. Healing and justice are the same river. You just don't like where it flows. I am not hiding. I'm helping. LR. Fingerprints yielded nothing. DNA on the stamp was inconclusive, but the style, the cold precision, was unmistakable. Lydia Rowe was alive, watching and proud of her work. As trials concluded, the remaining patients struggled to rebuild. Evan wrote letters from prison, describing vivid dreams of Lydia's voice. "Sometimes," he said, "I still hear her telling me I did the right thing." Jenna Price vanished after her release on probation. Her apartment, when checked, was empty except for a notebook on the kitchen counter. On the first page, "She's still guiding me. The cleansing isn't finished." Detective Baines kept that page pinned to her wall, a silent reminder that the case wasn't over. By 2021, Maple Hollow had tried to bury the story. The clinic was sold, renovated into a yoga studio. But the town's psyche remained fractured. Parents whispered warnings about therapy. Pastors preached about false prophets. Even Baines wasn't immune. She began seeing her own therapist after nightmares of Lydia's calm voice in interrogation rooms. "You can't fight someone like her with evidence," she told a colleague once. "You fight her with faith, and I don't have much left." Then, in April 2022, a 911 call came from a farmhouse outside Asheville, North Carolina. The caller, a young man named Thomas Greer, claimed his therapist had told him to take justice into his own hands. When police arrived, they found an elderly landlord beaten unconscious and, in the living room, a framed photo of Dr. Lydia Rowe, smiling beside her client. Fingerprints on the frame matched Lydia Rowe. She started again. Each new client followed the same arc. Sessions promising empowerment, recordings reinforcing obedience, and a climactic act framed as personal liberation. Lydia's voice always present, always calm. Investigators built a federal task force, linking incidents across 4 states. They called it Operation Calm Voice. But Lydia was meticulous. She changed names, towns, appearances. She left no digital trace. Every time the task force thought they were close, she dissolved into the ether, like smoke, like an echo fading before you can name it. In August 2023, nearly 4 years after the first crime, Detective Baines received an unmarked package. Inside was a single flash drive labeled Session 0. The file began with white noise. Then, Lydia's unmistakable voice. "Hello, Laura. You've been very patient. I think it's time we talk about your trauma. You've been chasing me to feel control again, haven't you? Let's begin." Then silence. And, at the end, a faint sound. A door creaking open. Detective Laura Baines stared at the small black flash drive for nearly an hour before she plugged it in. It was past midnight in her cramped apartment above Main Street. The kind of place that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old paper. Her desk was littered with files in a roll case, years of transcripts, photographs, and patient statements. For 4 years she had chased a ghost, and now the ghost had reached out. She slid the drive into her laptop. A single file blinked on the screen, Session 0.mp3. When she pressed play, static filled the room. Then came that voice, the same calm, lilting tone she listened to in evidence rooms, the voice that haunted every sleepless night since Maple Hollow. "Hello, Laura. You've been patient. You've been diligent. Let's talk about why." The air seemed to thicken. "You think you're different from them," Lydia Rowe said softly. "But you came to me too, didn't you? Not in my office, but in your dreams, in your questions. You needed me." Then silence, followed by a faint creak, the sound of a door opening somewhere behind the microphone. Laura paused the recording, heart pounding. The metadata showed the file was created only 3 days earlier. The location tag had been stripped, but buried cache file hinted at a GPS coordinate fragment. 35.65N/82.55W, Asheville. Lydia was taunting her and leaving breadcrumbs. By dawn, Laura was on the road south, the highway ribboning through fog-drenched hills. The coordinates led her to a decaying farmhouse 10 miles outside Asheville. The police tape from the Thomas Greer assault still fluttered in the wind. Inside, sunlight slanted through broken shutters, catching dust like floating ash. On the living room wall, faint outlines remained where pictures had been removed. In one corner stood a chair, old, wooden, draped with sheet. When Laura lifted the cloth, a voice recorder clattered to the floor. She pressed play. Lydia recorded, "Remember? Thomas. Anger is a compass. Follow where it points." Thomas. It points to him. "My landlord." Lydia. "Then follow it until the world feels balanced." Laura's hand trembled. The recorder stopped with a small click. Someone had wiped the device clean except for that fragment. Left intentionally, she suspected, for her. Back at the local field office, technicians recovered dozens of deleted files from the flash drive. They weren't audio. They were scam letters, all addressed to people she recognized, victims, ex-patients, even journalists who'd covered the case. Each letter followed a pattern. "You've been living under others' rules. It's time to reclaim the narrative. I'll guide you when you're ready. L.R. asterisk." The timestamps revealed something darker. The most recent letter was dated 2 weeks ago. Lydia hadn't slowed down, she'd expanded. Investigators found at least 6 new clients across state lines. A nurse accused of poisoning her supervisor, a college student arrested for cyber theft, a widower who burned down his neighbor's shed to cleanse bad energy. All of them shared one phrase in their diaries or statements. She said, "Healing requires a spark." FBI agent Carlin Gwynn, newly assigned to the task force, traced Lydia's movements through digital breadcrumbs. Prepaid cell phones, rideshare accounts, cash transfers through small community churches that offered donation therapy. She's not hiding anymore, Carla told Laura. She's recruiting. Everywhere Lydia appeared, she left behind quiet devastation. Yet no one could say precisely how she compelled obedience. Victims describe her sessions as meditative, transcendent, like she was inside my head finishing my thoughts. Neuroscientists later theorized she used conversational hypnosis, mixed with trauma bonding techniques. Small triggers, mirrored breathing, phrases looping into the subconscious until guilt and gratitude blurred. Laura didn't need theory. She'd heard it. She felt it. Every time Lydia's voice reached her speakers, something inside her stilled, the same unnerving calm that had broken stronger people. In September 2023, one of Lydia's earliest patients, Marissa Cole, was released from the psychiatric facility on parole. She requested a meeting with Laura. They met at a diner off I-40. Marissa looked older than her 41 years. Thin, pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Her hands shook as she stirred her coffee. She writes to me, Marissa said quietly. From where? No return address. But she knows things. Things from therapy I never said out loud. She said she forgives me for misunderstanding her. She slid a folded letter across the table. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. Marissa, you were brave once. Be brave again. The world needs cleansing. There's a gathering soon. Asheville will remember us. LR. Laura's stomach turned. A gathering. It wasn't just therapy anymore. It was congregation. 3 weeks later, a flyer surfaced on an online wellness forum. The Awakening Retreat, October 12th to 14th. Transform fear into freedom. Limited attendance. Facilitated by Dr. Lydia Rowe. Location disclosed upon registration. Lydia Rowe, the alias Lydia had used before. The payment method? Cash on arrival. Laura and Carla arranged an undercover operation. They registered 2 agents as attendees, posing as trauma survivors. A small mountain lodge near Hot Springs, North Carolina, was rented out entirely for the weekend. When surveillance drones circled the property on the first evening, they captured 15 people sitting in a candlelit semicircle around a woman in white linen. She spoke softly, gesturing with deliberate grace. Even from the grainy footage, there was no doubt it was Lydia Rowe. Through a hidden microphone and an agent's pendant, investigators recorded the session. You've all carried pain that wasn't yours, Lydia's voice cooed. Tonight, you return to the world. We act not out of hate, but out of restoration. The group repeated her phrases like prayer. Return it. Restore it. She passed around slips of paper, asking each participant to write a name, the person who had taken from them. The audio ended with a whisper. Tomorrow we act. Small acts of balance. Then we'll all be free. At 2 a.m., a SWAT team closed in, but by the time they breached the lodge, Lydia and 4 attendees were gone. On the floor lay a single candle still burning, wax pooled like blood. 2 days later, a string of bizarre crimes hit nearby counties. An arson at a nursing home, a break-in at a hospital records office, a local judge assaulted in his driveway. Each suspect arrested claimed a similar defense. She said this would heal me. The retreat had been a catalyst. Lydia hadn't just manipulated individuals anymore. She created a movement. The investigation consumed Laura entirely. She stopped sleeping, stopped answering friends. Every lead felt personal. She reread the flash drive letters until the words seemed to whisper themselves. One night, she dreamed of sitting in Lydia's office again, even though she'd never truly been a patient there. Lavender in the air. The gentle hum of a diffuser. Lydia across from her, smiling. You're tired of chasing shadows, the dream Lydia said. What if you stopped fighting and listened? When Laura woke, her pulse was calm, too calm. She realized with horror that her own mind was slipping into the cadence of Lydia's conditioning. She unplugged her speakers and smashed the flash drive against the floor. But even in silence, the voice lingered. Desperate, Laura sought help from Dr. Elise Kendrick, a forensic psychologist specializing in cult deprogramming. Elise reviewed the tapes and letters with professional detachment until she reached session 0. When the audio ended, Elise sat motionless. "This isn't random suggestion," she said finally. "She's building dependency loops. Each phrase reinforces submission, but only when the listener believes they're resisting it." "Meaning?" Laura asked. "The more you fight her, the deeper she gets in." Elise proposed a radical approach. Allow herself to be bait, to draw Lydia in by appearing open to her methods. Laura agreed, though every instinct screamed against it. Using a burner email, Laura reached out to one of Lydia's online coaches, posing as a journalist seeking an interview. Within 48 hours, she received a reply. "Healing is readiness. If your intentions are pure, we can talk. Bring no team. L." Attached was a one-way bus ticket to Charleston, South Carolina, and coordinates to an address labeled the Glassroom. The address led to an abandoned greenhouse outside the city limits. Moonlight poured through cracked panes, painting fractured reflections on the floor. At the center stood a table with 2 chairs, and Lydia Rowe. She looked unchanged, silver-streaked hair pulled back, linen coat flowing like a robe, expression serene. "Detective Baines," she said, as if greeting an old friend. "You've come such a long way." Laura's hand hovered near her concealed recorder. "You sent me the flash drive." "Of course. You needed an invitation." They spoke for nearly an hour. Lydia never raised her voice, never threatened. She talked about the sickness of compliance, about reclaiming pain as purpose. Every sentence was surgical. And then, casually, she revealed something that froze Laura's blood. "You think I created them," Lydia said. "But I only finished what someone else began." "Who?" "The one who taught me how to listen." Before Laura could press further, headlights flashed outside. Lydia smiled. "Your friends are here. It's time for me to go." When the agents burst in, the greenhouse was empty. Lydia had vanished through a hidden back door, leaving behind only a small portable speaker looping her voice. You can't catch an echo. Weeks later, analysts decoded Lydia's statement. Buried in her early transcripts from graduate school was a name. Dr. Nathaniel Carter, her thesis advisor in Chicago, an experimental psychologist later dismissed for unethical behavioral conditioning trials. His research induced moral inversion via guided hypnosis. Carter had disappeared from academia in 2003, the same year Lydia changed her name. When investigators tracked old associates, one revealed a chilling coincidence. Carter had opened a private wellness foundation in Savannah, Georgia, 3 years ago under the alias Drive N. Rowan. His mission statement mirrored Lydia's almost verbatim. It wasn't over. She hadn't acted alone. Meanwhile, reports surfaced of Rowe wellness reunions, secret meetings advertised through encrypted messaging apps. Survivors from Maple Hollow and new recruits gathered to share acts of balance. In one recorded message leaked to authorities, Lydia's voice addressed the group. "Our chains were comfort. Now we hold the keys. Each act you take writes a new law. The world will learn to heal itself through consequence." Her movement had evolved into ideology. Dr. Elise Kendrick continued studying the tapes. One night she noticed an anomaly, subaudible tones beneath Lydia's speech. When amplified, they formed rhythmic pulses matching fadeaway frequencies used in hypnotic induction. She embedded neurological triggers. Elise told Laura, even the recordings themselves are tools of conditioning. If true, anyone who would listen repeatedly, including Laura, might carry implanted suggestions. Laura tried to laugh it off until she began waking each night at 3 a.m., hearing the same phrase whispering through her mind. "Begin again." An informant later uncovered a storage unit rented under the name Lydia Hollis. Inside were boxes of medical charts, cassette copies, and notebooks filled with handwritten observations. One entry read, "The detective fascinates me. She resists beautifully. Resistance is the purest form of faith." Another, "The mentor returns soon. Preparation nearly complete." Among the papers was a map of the East Coast with pins in Savannah, Richmond, Portland, and Maple Hollow, connected by a thread forming a rough spiral pattern converging on Washington, D.C. Carl and Gwen pieced it together. Lydia and her possible mentor were planning a grand alignment, a coordinated series of psychological triggers. The spiral pattern match dates of upcoming conferences and wellness expos. If her recordings were distributed publicly, even under the guise of meditation tracks, the effect could be catastrophic. She's moving from individuals to mass influence, Carla said. A cult without walls. On March 10th, 2024, the podcast Mind Awake uploaded a surprise episode titled Session Zero Awakening. It went viral overnight. Millions of streams. Praise for its soothing female voice. Within 48 hours, hospitals in 3 states reported unrelated assaults committed by listeners claiming they felt called to balance an injustice. Forensic audio confirmed it. The speaker was Lydia Rowe. The Department of Justice declared her a domestic terror threat. Social media platforms raced to remove the audio, but mirror uploads kept reappearing, each slightly altered as if adapting. Elise discovered a pattern in the waveform's peaks. When converted to text through spectrogram analysis, they formed a cryptic sentence. Session 3 begins with you, Laura. No one else's name appeared. Lydia wasn't just speaking to the masses anymore. She was orchestrating a duel with a detective who refused a break. At 11:57 p.m. on March 21st, Laura's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but answered. Hello, Laura. The voice said, low, measured, unmistakable. It's time to finish what we started. Where are you? Closer than you think. You've been preparing for this session all along. The line went dead. Moments later, an email arrived containing an address in Washington, D.C. and 2 words. Come alone. Laura stared at the screen until dawn. Every rational instinct told her to alert the task force. Every personal instinct, the one Lydia had carved open, told her this was the only way to end it. She packed her badge, her recorder, and a single printed page from Lydia's first file. Patient 0, LH. The initials weren't Lydia's. They belonged to Laura Baines's own mother, who had once been treated by a young therapist in Richmond 2 decades earlier, a therapist named Lydia Hollander. The realization hit like ice. Their connection went back far before Maple Hollow. Lydia hadn't chosen her by accident. The address led to an abandoned therapy institute near the Potomac, shuttered since 2001. Dust layered the hallways, but candles flickered down a corridor leading to a single door marked Session 3. Laura stepped inside. The room was empty except for a chair, a tape recorder, and a note pinned to the wall. Sit. Press play. Trust the process. Her fingers hovered above the button as sirens wailed distantly outside. She knew backup would arrive soon. But she also knew that Lydia had never left anything unfinished, and that pressing play might be the only way to finally hear the truth. She exhaled, closed her eyes, and pressed the button. Static. Then the calm, familiar voice filled the darkness. Welcome back, Laura. I've missed our sessions. Let's talk about your mother. The tape clicked, and behind Lydia's voice came a second one. Male, older, smoother. Good evening, detective. I'm Dr. Nathaniel Carter. Lydia speaks highly of you. Laura's blood ran cold. The courtroom was hushed that morning, the kind of silence that carries its own gravity. Every seat was filled. Reporters, former patients, curious townspeople, even the families of those who'd been drawn into her twisted orbit. The air smelled faintly of coffee and anxiety. At the front, Dr. Evelyn Cross sat between her 2 defense attorneys, hands folded, hair neatly pinned back, expression unreadable. For nearly 3 years, the name Dr. Cross had been synonymous with the town's shame. Yet there she was, immaculate and poised, a picture of grace beneath fluorescent lights. Her reputation as a brilliant therapist was long gone. What remained was a specter of a woman accused of orchestrating chaos through other people's minds. But as the trial began, something unexpected happened. Evelyn didn't crumble. She didn't deny. She didn't even seem afraid. She looked almost fascinated. The prosecution built its case meticulously. They called in the victims, her patients, to the stand, one by one, each voice adding another layer to the nightmare. First was Daniel Vance, the ex-Marine who'd robbed a jewelry store after months of therapy with Evelyn. His testimony shook the courtroom. She made me believe I was taking back control. he said, his voice trembling. Every session, she talked about power, about breaking cycles. I thought she was helping me overcome PTSD. I didn't realize she was rewiring me, convincing me that violence was healing. Next came Mara Ellis, the nurse who'd embezzled thousands from her hospital's charity fund. She told the jury that Evelyn had guided her into the theft as a way to reclaim autonomy from a system that devalued her. She said morality was a prison, Mara whispered, that if I wanted to be truly free, I had to stop obeying invisible rules. Then came Aaron Bishop, a high school teacher who'd planted false evidence in his colleague's car, leading to an arrest that almost destroyed a family. He broke down mid-testimony, gasping for air between sobs. She told me to stand up for myself, he said. She said people only respect those who act first. I didn't realize she was teaching me her philosophy. By the time the fifth patient testified, even Evelyn's own lawyers looked pale. The jury sat rigid, absorbing the quiet horror of her influence. It was a portrait of manipulation so sophisticated, so psychological, it blurred the line between therapy and indoctrination. During cross-examination, the defense attempted to frame Evelyn's actions as misguided therapy, not malice. They claimed she'd merely pushed boundaries in pursuit of healing, her patients misinterpreting her metaphors for empowerment. But the prosecution unveiled what they called the Black Notebooks, 27 leather journals recovered from her home office. Inside, detectives found detailed transcripts of sessions, notes on each patient weaknesses, fears, and triggers. Some entries were chillingly strategic. Daniel needs purpose. Channel his aggression through action. Mara's guilt is pliable. Convince her that doing wrong is an act of liberation. Aaron has moral rigidity, perfect for testing moral inversion techniques. One entry, dated just weeks before her arrest, read simply, "Therapy is the art of power exchange. When they surrender their minds, you own their world." The courtroom gasped when those words were read aloud. Evelyn smiled faintly, as if remembering an old poem. Detective Ruth Delgado, who had led the investigation since its early stages, was the prosecution's final witness. She described her first encounter with Evelyn as an interview that felt like hypnosis. She kept redirecting every question back to me. Delgado said on the stand, "She asked about my family, my fears, my need for control." By the end of that hour, I realized I had barely gotten a word of value from her, but she'd gotten plenty from me. The breakthrough in the case, Delgado revealed, came from a voice recorder hidden in a patient's purse. One of Evelyn's clients, Lana Pierce, had grown suspicious after being urged to test her moral boundaries. Lana recorded their next 3 sessions. The tapes revealed Evelyn's slow psychological conditioning, encouraging Lana to stage small acts of theft as exercises in self-trust. Evelyn's voice, calm and melodic, said things like, "You've been told right and wrong by people who wanted to keep you small. Try doing something they'd never approve of. That's freedom. Don't think of it as stealing. Think of it as balancing the scales. The world took from you first." The final recording ended with Evelyn whispering, "Next week, you'll understand what I mean by transformation through action." 3 days later, Lana was arrested attempting to set fire to her ex-husband's car. During trial recesses, media networks dissected every frame of Evelyn's expressions. Psychologists were interviewed nightly, debating whether she was a sociopath, a narcissist, or something new altogether. Dr. Helena Cho, a behavioral analyst brought in by the state, described Evelyn's method as covert behavioral reprogramming. She exploited the inherent trust between therapist and patient. Cho explained, she didn't force them to commit crimes. She invited them to question morality, then rewarded the parts of them that acted on that questioning. Over time, she became the moral authority in their lives. That's how cults are born. When Evelyn finally took the stand, the courtroom was tense enough to hear a cough echo. She spoke softly. "I never forced anyone to do anything. I simply showed them who they really were." Her attorney asked, "Did you encourage criminal behavior, Dr. Cross?" Evelyn smiled slightly. "I encourage authenticity. If authenticity frightens society, perhaps the problem lies with society, not with me." After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 4 days. On the morning of the 5th, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on 12 counts of coercion, fraud, and criminal negligence. When the words echoed through the courtroom, Evelyn showed no emotion. Her eyes scanned the room slowly, resting momentarily on each former patient who had testified. Some met her gaze with anger, others with tears, and one, Daniel, simply looked away. The judge sentenced her to 35 years in state prison, calling her actions a slow-motion massacre of the human will. The town of Brookhaven breathed a collective sigh of relief. The media circus moved on. Her clinic building was sold, renovated, and reopened as a wellness center, though few could walk by it without shivering. But not everyone believed the story was over. 2 years into her sentence, prison guards began noticing something strange. Evelyn was receiving hundreds of letters. They came from former clients, from strangers, from admirers who believed she'd been misunderstood. Inside her cell, she was reportedly conducting informal sessions with fellow inmates, teaching mindfulness, control, and self-liberation. The warden later admitted she had an uncanny ability to calm even the most violent offenders. Then one day, a journalist named Nadia West received a letter of her own. It was postmarked from the state correctional facility, neatly typed, and signed Dr. Evelyn Cross. It read, "They say I manipulated people into crime. But ask yourself, Nadia, what is therapy if not permission to change? If I gave them freedom, was that evil? Or did I simply hold up a mirror they were too afraid to look into? Come visit. I think you'll understand." Nadia went, and she recorded the interview that would later reignite public obsession with the case. The recording, later leaked to a true crime podcast, captured conversation that blurred reality. Nadia asked, "Do you feel remorse for what happened?" Evelyn laughed softly. "Remorse? No. I feel clarity. The people I manipulated became more honest versions of themselves. Isn't that the goal of therapy?" Nadia pushed, "But they hurt people. They committed crimes." "Pain," Evelyn replied, "is the price of truth." After a pause, Nadia asked, "Do you still believe you were helping them?" Evelyn leaned closer to the recorder. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You came here to interview me, Nadia. But tell me, how's your marriage? Are you happy? Do you ever lie awake wondering what it would feel like to stop pretending?" The audio ends there. Nadia reportedly ended the interview abruptly, and 2 weeks later, she left her job, divorced her husband, and disappeared for 3 months. When she resurfaced, she refused to speak publicly about what had happened. But in one late-night interview, she said quietly, "She doesn't stop working once you leave the room." Years passed. Books were written. Documentaries aired. Evelyn became both a cautionary tale and a cult fascination. Her teachings, somehow leaked from prison, circulated online in dark self-help forums under titles like The Liberation Doctrine and Authenticity Without Fear. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit later confirmed that at least 5 new crimes were committed by individuals who'd cited her teachings as inspiration. Evelyn herself never sought parole. When asked why, she simply said, "Freedom is a state of mind. I already have it." In her 15th year of imprisonment, she began writing a manuscript. The title, The Mirror Room. No one knows how she managed to have it smuggled out. But weeks after her death, from what officials called natural causes, a small publisher received a package containing the complete draft. Its final line read, "We all become the things we fear. I just helped them get there faster." The story of Dr. Evelyn Cross forces us to confront something deeply uncomfortable. She didn't hold a gun or wield a knife or force anyone's hand. She simply spoke. She understood that the most dangerous weapon in the world is belief, especially when wrapped in the language of healing. For her patients, therapy became a mirror reflecting their darkest impulses. For Evelyn, it was an experiment in how far human minds could bend before they broke. In the end, she left behind a haunting legacy, the reminder that evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it listens. And now, perhaps the most chilling question remains. If she spoke to you, would you have believed her too?